I'm Christy McDonald. Joining me now to talk about where things really stand in Michigan is Sandy Baruah, the CEO of the Detroit Regional Chamber. Sandy, it's always good to
Good
see
morning.
you. And Doug Rothwell, the CEO of Business Leaders for Michigan. How are you,
Christy.
Doug?
Good morning. Good.
All right. You know, I love having both of you here to be able to say, all right, let's stand back and get the bird's eye view of where things stand and how would you characterize where Michigan is right now? And I'm going to start with you, Sandy.
We're on an incredibly positive trajectory. I think, the 8 years that we had under Rick Snyder really reset the business environment in this state. And the world is frankly taking notice. We have more work to do. Fortunately, our new governor is focusing on a lot of those things. Obviously, the roads, education. So a lot of work to do, but very, very positive trajectory.
Do you share his positive thought about things?
I do, Christy. I mean, first of all, you picked two people that are very much in sync in terms of our outlook on things. But so I agree with everything that Sandy said. I think the thing we have to remember as Michigan, though, is that even with all the good things that have happened, we're still kind of an average performing state when you look at most of the metrics. And so there's still a ways for us to go to even do better. But education and infrastructure are the two top issues we see.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about that. And what's really interesting to me always when we come up here to the policy conference is you have everyone in one place who can influence policy and who can push and say, all right, these are the things that we have to do and this is the direction that we have to go with. So Doug, I'm going to start with you. In looking at education right now, we've done reports, we've had multiple studies on what we believe that Michigan has to do. What do you see are the most critical aspects right now that we need to push policy-wise in improving K-12 education in the state?
Well, whatever we do, we need to be on the same page. And I think the thing that we've tried to do this last year is put together this initiative called Launch Michigan, which is a coalition that Sandy's part of that includes 20-some stakeholders, education, philanthropy, business. The thing we've not done in Michigan in the past with education reform is we've done it as individual groups. We've tried to kind of top-down approach. If you look at the states that have been most successful, it's been more bottoms-up where there's been a shared playbook. That's what we're trying to get to, and I think we're going to get there this year. But there are some specific issues we're really focused on: changing the way we finance education, doing a better job to support teachers, making sure we have a better accountability system. Those are some of the areas we're focused on with Launch Michigan.
And if I could just pile on for a second, the importance of Launch Michigan really can't be overstated because, as Doug said, this is the first time we're doing it in this way. But also, I just want to caution folks, this is not going to be fast. We did not get into the education fix that we're in overnight, and the solution is not going to be overnight. I mean, this is not going to be a 6-month issue a report and hope for the best thing. This has got to be long-term, blocking and tackling with a group of very disparate leaders to get to a common solution. Is everyone going to be happy at the end of this process? Absolutely not. But are we going to be on a better trajectory afterwards? Absolutely.
And I think that kind of speaks to where some of the compromise is going to come in. And people, do they feel that they have that compromise in them to say, I might not win in a couple places, but I've got to give here? I want to ask you, Sandy, though, how big of a factor do you believe that the state of our education in Michigan is when businesses come and say, oh, I'm going to either start a business here in Michigan, I'm going to move more people here, or, oh, I'm taking a look at what's happening. Maybe Michigan is a little further down on the list.
It is an issue, especially when you look at areas that have even more challenged school districts. So I think one of the things that we're going to try to do today here in the programming is send a message that Michigan's house is on fire when it comes to education performance, and this is not a Detroit, Saginaw, Flint issue. This is a state of Michigan issue. If for those of us who live in affluent neighborhoods and we have this thought that our schools are performing at a really high level compared to our national peers, we are not. So this is everywhere. So yes, it is a business detriment issue. And also, when it comes to higher ed, we have basically, as Doug said, dead average when it comes to adults in our state with either a 4-year, 2-year, or a highly skilled certificate. Today's companies, they need highly skilled workers, and we need to create more of them here in Michigan.
Okay, so how do we do that, Doug?
Well, I mean, again, we need a shared playbook. I mean, we can't try to keep solving this problem with different ideologies that are driven from the top down. We've got to have the education community buy into things. A good example is, we've tried reforms in the last few years, like the A through F accountability grading system. We've tried a 3rd grade reading reform initiative. but we haven't done it in a way where the education community really bought in totally.
Or felt that they were part of that decision making.
They didn't, absolutely not. And so that's what we're trying to really accomplish here. And the good news is we've been at this now for almost a year. Nobody's walked away. We've already got to some contentious points, and everybody's leaning in, I would say, even more than they were when we started.
Let me ask you about this. What about governance? Because much has been made of the fact that we have a state-elected school board, who picks the state superintendent, but then you have the governor who controls certain areas and aspects of the testing and certain departments that control that. Should something change with the governance of how we control our system, and how difficult is that going to be to get to the root of that?
We have deliberately, with Launch Michigan, not addressed that issue because it's a constitutional issue. It would require a vote of the people to make that change. We do think that we have a structural problem in Michigan. We have a lot of school districts. We have a lot of layers of education that a lot of other states don't. If you look at, for example, Jeb Bush, who's going to be speaking here today from Florida, much smaller number of districts to deal with, but it makes it easier to be able to implement reform. But the reality is that, for us to try to get through constitutional changes, there's a lot of things that we can do that's lower hanging fruit that's going to make a difference before we tackle that.
All right, let's talk a little bit about infrastructure. I think we can all agree that we need to fix the damn roads, but what that path is going to be is still a little bit up in the air. Sandy, talk to me about what people are saying to you and what people are talking about in terms of their threshold for paying for a gas tax that the governor is proposing, and what kind of, I think, goodwill is she going to be getting from the legislature after the no-fault reform that they're signing here this morning.
Your last point, I think, is really key. There is some muscle memory, some goodwill built up on both sides that the Republican leaders in the legislature, the Democratic governor have been able to come together on a really big and vexing problem. So I think that gives people, hope and confidence. The other thing is that there are more state legislators here at this conference than there have been in years.
Okay.
And I really want to thank the Republican legislative leadership for making room in the calendar for all the legislators to be up here. So there's a little bit of a magic that occurs up here. I mean, not only all the legislators up here, but all the business leaders are up here. All the federal officials are up here. So there are conversations going on. I'm not part of them, but there are conversations going on focused on the road. So hopefully we can at least move the ball down a little bit further.
And again, a huge significant factor for businesses and business leaders is saying, look, this has got to get fixed or solved in one way or another. A $2.5 billion problem that's only going to grow over time.
Well, look, if we don't invest in ourselves, how can we possibly expect people to want to invest in us from outside the state or even inside the state? And look, I represent all the CEOs of the major corporations in Michigan. We absolutely think this is a top priority, and yes, it's going to be a tax increase. But if we don't make this investment, I think we're going to really hurt ourselves for the long term.
Here's a real quick story on that. When you look at Michigan's agriculture producers, they are actually losing money in their trucks because their produce and their other kind of perishables are getting damaged on the way to the processing facility or to the end customer because our roads are so bad. The produce is being, and they're losing, significant money in their own trucks on their way to their own processing facilities.
Well, it's something that some people you wouldn't even consider, you wouldn't even think about. All right, Doug Rothwell, Sandy Baruah, thanks so much for joining me. I really appreciate the conversation and can't wait to see what comes out of the conference. Good things always do. So we'll keep on talking to you about education, infrastructure, and so much more.
Great.
Good to see you.